So I'm going to introduce my colleague here, Alan Walters from Southern Illinois University. Alan has worked in Afghanistan, and he always has a very entertaining presentation. So Alan, the floor is yours.
Okay, we're ready to move on here then. Well, as Paul said, I spent a little bit of time in Afghanistan, and I am a vegetable specialist from Southern Illinois University. You probably didn't even know those existed, right? A vegetable specialist. What's a vegetable specialist? So there's all types of us in ag. So going from high-value horticulture crops, that kind of separate those out. I have a colleague that's a pomologist. Anyone know what a pomologist is?
Focuses on palm trees.
Actually, he's a pomologist.
Yes.
A fruit person. Yeah. So today I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about high-value vegetables. And it's a very important part of third world country production. And it adds a little bit to their everyday needs of vitamins and all those types of things that we as Americans take for granted that come with our food. But today I'm going to kind of talk about several different things here relating to vegetable crops and in Afghanistan. We're going to kind of talk a little about production marketing, a little bit about vegetable crop relationships, and I want to kind of allow you to understand how we kind of associate vegetables and how we kind of put them into groupings. We're going to talk a little bit about a crop cycle for one of the important crops there, melons, and what are some of the issues and opportunities in vegetables. What can we kind of do? What are some of the things that I saw when I was there that are some major issues that we need to kind of deal with? And those relating to what I primarily saw are things like soil management, water management, and pest management is major issues. And then at the end, some takeaway messages. So vegetables, in most cases, are grown on a fairly small scale. And generally, you can see this inside wall compounds, and we got inside, and most of them are tended to by women in most cases. Although there are a little bit of commercial production going on, but not to the extent that they want. And what surprised me is that they told me all the vegetables that are produced are primarily used in country. There's very little export. And when I was there, they're really trying to work on some of these export markets, trying to work some of these vegetables to kind of get some money flowing back into the country. And what really got me was they grow a lot of potatoes up in the mountains, like in Bamyan, north of Kabul. And the Pakistanis will come over and buy a lot of those potatoes. They will take them to Pakistan, put them in cold storage facilities, buy them for a really cheap price because everybody has potatoes at the same time, and then take those same potatoes back to Afghanistan and sell them for like 5 times the price because they have the cold storage facilities for potatoes. And then they'll bring them back in at different times of the year and sell them back to the Afghans, which they started trying to create some of these earthen cool storage facilities, and maybe you'll get a chance to see some of those. And it's true, most commercial planting is kind of done willy-nilly. They just kind of go out there and do it without having that clear link to a specific market. Improvements are needed throughout the supply chain, from seed quality all the way to harvest and post-harvest. You're going to have another guy here today kind of talk a little about post-harvest. And for fruits and vegetables, post-harvest, I'm a production specialist. So we go about how do we produce vegetables. But I've come to realize it's not always about the production. to me, from going and seeing third world countries, it's all about post-harvest. You'll see these guys in Afghanistan pushing carts, and it's 115 degrees, and you can just look at those fruits and vegetables, and they're losing quality over a period of time. You know, we take things, we buy at the market, we take it home, we put it in the refrigerator, it lasts for a long period of time, right? They don't have that opportunity. And any little things you can kind of do, and you're going to kind of see some of that this morning with another presentation on post-harvest. So, as I said, or alluded to a little bit, good production starts with good seed. You have to have good seed. In a lot of these countries, they just don't have the high quality seed. And crop rotation is something we need to think about as well with vegetables. Vegetables come in a wide range of different families and associated relationships, and we're going to kind of talk about that. And even in your home garden, you don't want to go and plant similar plants year after year in the same area because they tend to have similar insect problems, similar disease problems, and if you plant them in the soil gets certain types of disease-causing organisms, and they will eventually build up to a point where they will be devastating to a crop. So tomato and potato, for example, are in the same family. We're going to kind of get to that in just a little bit. Also, in marketing, so we start with something good. We have to have the good seed. And in Afghanistan for vegetables, most of the seed are not hybrids like we grow here in America. Most of them are open pollinated, what we would call heirlooms. You know, they save the seed year after year. They take those seeds, they store them somewhere. So you want to kind of do something to kind of help them. And what's one of the easiest things to do, and I think Jeff is going to kind of show you this afternoon with wheat seed, is how to do a simple germination test. You know, something simple, a simple paper towel test. Put 100 seed in there. After a few days, you go back and you count the number that have germinated out of 100, and that gives you germination percentage. So it tells you if you need to overseed to get the number of plants you need in a field. Because if you're throwing wheat seed out, you know, if it's only 25% germination, you want to go ahead and make sure you have enough seed out there to get that stand that you want. Same with vegetables or any other crop. So it's something simple to do. And marketing at the other end is also important, and you want to kind of have an idea of where this crop is going if you're going to try to sell it. Just don't have that crop and have nowhere to go with it once it's done. And it's important to kind of have an understanding of that buyer and specifically what are they looking for. And they'll sit there, and I've seen them bicker about quality of this product versus another product. You're going to get lower than this because the product doesn't meet standards that we should have, and all that. And what time do they want the crop is also important. And how will you address these issues within the Dell and the community to kind of get us what we want at that particular time. So marketing is also an important part of that. Now, to kind of give you an idea of where all the green always is in Afghanistan, it's always near water. And I was there on a water project, and you can see this is in the mountainous areas, and you can see there some fruit growing here, and there's wheat here. There's some vegetables and other little things around another section there for fruit. But you can see it only goes to a certain point as far as the water can be taken away from the river. That's where and this is the Helmand Valley in southern Afghanistan. Same difference. You can see as far as you can get the water up is where the green is. And water is of the utmost importance, and I just wanted to kind of share that with you. And it kind of also shows you how a lot of different types of crops are produced in sections, and you can see all these little canals kind of going in here to get it to that point. Not all parts of Afghanistan have canals. You know all the different types of watering systems they use in Afghanistan. Have you guys talked about that much? You talked about canals, right? You talked about carezes et al. And wells. So there are several different sources of water to kind of be tapped into. A lot of these areas, they're tapping into the groundwater, just like here in California, and it's not sustainable. So every year they have to kind of go a little bit deeper to get that water if you're using a well. So they're going into these vast, wide open areas that were never, ever farmed before and digging wells. And that's a problem. But most of it is close to what we see for the rivers and water there. But vegetables play an important part in the Afghan diet and used in many different crop production schemes. I've eaten a lot of Afghan food, and every time it always seems there's some type of vegetable there. Although most of those calories come from wheat, they do try to supplement a little bit with some fruits and vegetables when they're in season. Now, if you're growing a small scale, that's usually home production and maybe a little bit of income, but usually it's going to be consumed domestically. Large scale production, though, is a major source of income, and this is where a lot of growers tend to have issues when they're trying to really produce large amounts of product. In the home, just like here, we don't really measure. As long as we get something, we're not getting the same yields as you would on a commercial basis. You're growing a lot of these older varieties at your house, like a tomato, and you're not really trying to get that high yield as much as you want that quality. Now, there's a wide variety of vegetables that are grown there. Cucumber, chili pepper. I used to have a photo in there of me out in the chili pepper field with some issues that were going on. But chili pepper is one of those crops that they can take from being a high value and what we call adding value even more to it. They can dry it down and ship it to other countries that want to make spicy foods like Pakistan. Pakistan buys a lot of dried chili peppers from Afghanistan, and it's easy to kind of dry it in that type of climate. Eggplant is important. Onion, melon. When I say melon here, that's kind of like a honeydew melon that we're kind of thinking of. Potato, tomato, and watermelon. And then you'll see some of these not quite as important. Cabbage, carrot, cauliflower, garlic, okra, spinach, and squash. And carrot and spinach is really important because that's where they developed. What we call the center of origin. The center of origin, where they came from, carrots and spinach, came from Afghanistan, which is kind of interesting. So this is an old one from 2003, now 10 years ago, but it still kind of holds true for where a lot of the production is and for different types of vegetables. You can see the caption I have down here: watermelon, tomato, potato, onion, and melon. A lot of melon here in Boglan and Balk. I spent a lot of time here. Potato, a lot in the mountains. You see a cobble here. A lot of potatoes are grown at higher elevations where it tends to be cool. Onions in certain provinces there. And watermelons kind of out on the fringes in Helmand down here as well. But melons are a very important crop. And why melons are so important, watermelons and melons, is it's the last arid climate before you get to China. So the last arid climate where it's really dry, they like it to be kind of under drought conditions as long as you have sufficient water. Kind of like here, most of the melon production that gets shipped to the eastern United States occurs in Arizona and in California, where we have really dry conditions. And that's why they're grown there, is they tend to like drought. If you have a lot of extra water, they tend to dilute the flavor. They're not as high quality. So you want a little bit of drought to kind of concentrate those flavors in there. But first off, I think it's important to kind of understand cool season versus warm season vegetables. Did you know there's a difference between vegetables, whether they're cool season, they grow very well in the cool season, right? Some grow very well when it's warm. So we have those that are cool season that grow best like in the fall and in the spring. And then the warm season, they want to be grown in the middle part of the summer when it's the hottest. They love the heat. The cool season crops are things like cabbage, carrot, cauliflower, garlic, lettuce, onion, potato, spinach. And then the warm season crops, those are the ones, if you're there during the summertime when it's so hot, those are the ones that you're going to kind of see produce, like chili pepper, cucumber, eggplant, melon, okra, squash, tomato, watermelon. They do not like to be grown at another time of the year. They like it to be really hot. So cool season, warm season. So if you're deployed in the fall, you're not going to see a lot of these warm season crops. You're mostly going to see the ones over here I have on the left of the screen that are the cool season crops. Now, if you're deployed in the spring, you may see a little bit of the cool season crops, and then you're going to see all these warm season vegetable crops that are grown. So, but it's also important to understand vegetable groupings. And I have in my book here, I'm going to kind of bring it over to the other side and kind of go through a few things here. So I think it's important, before we kind of do that, that you kind of understand some of the issues we're going to kind of talk about, and especially some of the things related to vegetable crop families. And that relates back to how to manage crop rotations within these families. And each family has a specific pest, soil, and water requirement usually, and we can kind of relate that back to the plant family issue. So if we look, you got your books out here, and at the back of my section on vegetables, I put a vegetable crop grouping section together, and this kind of identifies what different vegetable crop families look like, the most important ones that you're going to be dealing with. For example, allium, those are the onions, and garlic, and they kind of, those are the ones that tend to have the bulbs on them. Brassicas are like cabbage, cauliflower. This is what the brassica flower looks like. It used to be called the crucifery family because the flower kind of resembles a cross. It's just the shape of the flower. Cucurbits, which are an important part there, like melons, cucumbers, watermelons, and then we have the solanaceous crops, which are probably the most important, those being chili pepper, tomato, and potato. And then we have the carrot or parsley family, the Apiaceae, and carrots, and it shows you what the carrot flower kind of looks like. I grew up in the eastern United States, and we have Queen Anne's lace everywhere. And Queen Anne's lace is in this family. You know, carrots actually originated from a plant selection from that weed, Queen Anne's lace. But legume crops, you can see those a little bit, and those are the ones that actually fix nitrogen. Clover, beans, different types of beans, and peas are all in that specific type of family. So this is for your reference, and to kind of have this when you're out in the field, to kind of be able to advise a little bit on what particular family, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about why that is important here in just a second. So if we're trying to develop a vegetable crop rotational scheme, if we look at having, say, 3 fields or 3 different beds in a field or whatever, you can think of this as being 3 different fields even. The first year, you're going to plant potatoes in that field. Then you'll plant legumes in the second field, brassicas here in the third field, and onions there in the fourth field. All right? And then we're going to kind of start a rotational scheme. We're going to go on a 4-year rotational scheme, going in the 5th year, and you'd come back to potatoes. For example, In this bed, you go potatoes, then you move legumes here for the second year, brassicas, and then onions the last year, and then you can move potatoes and those back into that fifth year for a rotation. So this is the solanaceous family as we talked about. This is the legumes of the Fabaceae family, the Brassicaceae family, and the Allium family here. So that gives you 3 examples. And why is that so important to rotate? Because similar plants have similar problems. And if you grow a tomato and then a potato and then a pepper, those are all going to have similar issues. They're going to have similar insect problems, going to have similar disease problems that are going to build up in that location or in the soil. And even though you plant a tomato, you're going to have similar diseases that will attack a potato in that particular locale. So this is a photo I took in Afghanistan of a melon production field, and I was backed up against a mountain road, and as far as you could see, in like a 180-degree swath, there was melons out there, and it was toward the end of the season. So you can see melons are growing up here on these ridges, and in between they have furrow irrigation kind of going on there. Everyone knows what furrow irrigation is, right? From yesterday, they basin irrigation, furrow irrigation, all that. So this is a furrow irrigation field, and these are the excuse me. These are the melons here that you'll see in Afghanistan. They kind of look like what we would call a honeydew type of melon. They tend to be yellow on the outside, and they have a white flesh on the inside. Very tasty, but they didn't want us to eat a lot when we were there because they have a lot of issues with melon fly, and the guys just don't spray at the right time. They'll spray just a couple of days even before the harvest, and they have high residues of some of these pesticides, and they really don't want you to kind of consume those as much. So they limited it, even though they were really tasty. So melons are primarily grown for income and shipped into markets abroad. Excuse me. Some grown for home use, but excuse me, mostly the seed are saved year after year, and these are what we call land races. So a grower will go out into that field, for example. He'll go out in this field and he'll see, oh, well, I have a large melon here I'm going to save, a large melon here I'm going to save, and then he saves that seed for planting for the following year. And that's how they kind of keep it going without having to purchase these seed that's going to cost a lot of money for them. And there are some grown for home use, but mostly what I've seen for melons are for income generation. So I want you to kind of have an understanding that melons do play a real important role in Afghanistan. So of those that you've been in Afghanistan, have you seen melons at all? You've seen them? And they're very important, aren't they? And they're one of the most important ways that growers generate income. They sell these melons for $2 a piece. $2 a piece. That's a good chunk of money for every melon coming out of there. And when I was there, they were trying to develop these markets for these expanding supermarkets in India because the Indians were really wanting these melons, and the issue was getting them from Afghanistan through Pakistan to India because they're always battling that issue there. And and kind of get an idea of what are some of the problems that occur with melons. Let's say, for example, you're out in the field and they ask you, why aren't my melons setting on my plants? Well, there's lots of issues that could be going on there. Melons need, first of all, they need bees. So if there's no bees out there, if you look down, there's no bees, no bee activity in the morning, well, you need to bring some bees in from somewhere to get these fruit to start setting on the plant. Because Most cucurbits are what we call monoecious, which means they have both male and female flowers and separate flowers on the same plant. It's not a perfect flower. A perfect flower has both male and female parts in the same flower. An imperfect flower means that it only has either male or female parts. So most cucurbits are insect pollinated because they have pollen in one flower and the female part in another flower. So the pollen has to be moved to the female flower to allow fruit set. And that's one issue that needs to be dealt with when you're kind of walking through. Another thing, if they're not setting, they have to have adequate water. So if the plant's just trying to survive, if there's not enough water, you see a lot of bee activity, you'll know that maybe you need to find a source of water at this time, which is the most important. And scheduling water is very difficult. And water scheduling is something that even here in the United States, we have not really got to get it to the best that we possibly can. Because really, a lot of vegetables don't need a lot of water. They just need a lot to hang on until they get to a certain point. And for melons, the most important time to have water is at flowering and pollination, because those fruit are starting to set and they have to have water to develop. Remember, it's mostly just water, right? A melon fruit, or most vegetable products, even a leaf, is 95% water. Same thing. So it has to have water to grow and to develop. So the crop calendar for melons would be usually planting in March, April, May, similar to what we would see here in the United States, and harvesting in August and September. That's the typical growing cycle. So you'd see them out in the field in June, July, August. And some of the key cultural practices, thinking about seed germination. They save their own seed. How can we kind of evaluate those seed to see if they're still good? We talked about the seed germination evaluation. Pollination, we talked a little bit about that. We also talked a little about water management. And pest management is something we need to think about as well. And there's so many different types of insects and diseases that are problematic on melons. If you walk out in a field, you kick a plant, and you just see all these white flies kind of come up, you know that you need to kind of intervene at some point because they're taking all this energy away from the plant, and something needs to be done to kind of reduce that population a little bit. And really, powdery mildew, which is a disease, is another issue that can often show up. You'll look down at a plant and it'll be covered with all this sugary type white on the surface of the leaf. That's powdery mildew. And in dry climates, powdery mildew is a real problem. But really, the most important issue for pest management on melons is controlling the melon fly. And the melon fly is one of those that can be devastating to a melon grower. And you really can't tell how much damage that melon fly has done until you sell that product to somebody, they take it home, melon looks good on the outside, they cut it open, and it's just crawling with maggots on the inside, That's why it's such an issue, and they're trying to control it with all these toxic pesticides, even up until the day they're harvesting. So you really can't tell for a melon, and then you take it to a market and you sell your melons, and then they're cutting the melons when they go home or whatever, and there's all these melon fly larvae that's just crawling inside the melon, and it's inedible at that point. But most melons are land races, as we kind of talked about, which are open pollinated. They save the seed from year to year. We talked about a little bit about improper seed storage, poor germination rates. If you store it out in a shed somewhere and it gets 125 degrees during the summer and stays that way for several months, and then you try to plant the seed and the temperature in the autumn goes down and then it comes back up. Fluctuating temperatures is not very good for seed, right? And it's easy to do a seed germination test, and Jeff always kind of shows you that. Poor pollination, lack of water, we kind of talked about that. Insects, whitefly, melonfly, powdery mildew, we talked a little bit about. Weed species, not a lot of herbicides available in Afghanistan like we have here in the United States, so most of it is done by hand. If you walk out into the field and you see unhealthy foliage, things are kind of yellowing, that could be several different issues. You could have a disease, you could have a lot of insect feeding on the plant. You have to get down on your knees and kind of look at it, get a leaf, look at it and see what's going on. If you take a leaf, you don't see any insect activity, you don't see any disease-causing organisms on there. It could be related to fertility. And fertility is one of the things that we have to also deal with in Afghanistan. There's really no soil a lab in country that really does an adequate job in that. So storage and marketing, once we get to that point, what are some of the ways to cool the melon fruit? So once we harvest that melon fruit, if we put it out in the sun, it's still going to start to respire. It's going to start to lose its longevity. And there's a couple of different ways to think about this. And if you harvest a vegetable product in the mid-afternoon when it's hot, right? And even if you have the ability to cool it down, it takes so much energy to cool that fruit down. So it's best to harvest during the cool part of the day. And that's usually in the morning. And the morning is a cool... Think about when you walk out on your garden, right? And you touch a tomato. That's early morning, it's kind of cool, right? And if you leave that tomato sit out there and you try to go out and harvest it in the afternoon, it's hot, right? So it's got that heat in there, and that heat has to come out for longevity. Otherwise, it's just going to keep building up heat, building up heat, building up heat, building up heat. So with things like corn, and sweet corn, and with broccoli, they always top them off with ice to keep them as cool as possible, so they're not respiring. So vegetable products respire. They're alive. Even though you take like a cucumber, you put it out here on the table, it's actually respiring. It's dying. It's still alive. It's a live product. So anytime you're dealing with live products, you have to kind of think about how we can kind of do that. And one of the ways to kind of do that is, what are some of the low-cost options here we can use for cool storage? And I'm going to leave it at that. My colleague here is going to talk about that. And you'll see some of these options out in the field a little bit today. And this Strawbell or Adobe Cool House, you probably saw that out there already, right? So they're going to probably put something in, and you can kind of go inside and see that what the temperature is inside after they put water on it, and what the temperature is outside, and that's an option. And also, I've seen a lot of these below ground, subterranean, earthen cool storage facilities. It's like a root cellar, remember? My mom and dad always talk about when they were kids, they always had a root cellar, so they kept stuff in so they could go down and get potatoes and squash or whatever for the winter time. But it's the same principle, that where we dig something out, we build a structure, and we keep it below ground, and that keeps the produce cooler. It really does. I mean, the produce can survive for a much longer period of time when it's cooler in that type of facility. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of the major issues I saw when I was there, and one of the most important issues is soil management. They're mismanaged due to the lack of understanding of their importance in overall production system. Most think that the soil is there just to hold the plant. We're not really going to make the soil better over the period of time, because we don't know if we're going to kind of be over here next year or over there next year. Are we leaving? How long are we here at this particular location? And that's why we can't fix those damn soils. It's because the transient nature of everything that's going on there. Who wants to spend a lot of money building a particular soil? You know, if it's not my land to begin with, and I'm just going to get a percent of this, I'm just going to go into that system and abuse the system and not build that soil like we do here in America. So you have a piece of property, you know you're going to have it for a while, it's been in the family for hundreds of years, you're going to build that soil, you're going to make that soil better. But there, they really don't have that mindset yet. And what is a major problem is organic matter. There's not a lot of added back into the soil. Does everyone know what organic matter is? Think about wheat straw. You know, the wheat straw, you put it out, it kind of, you put it back in that system, it adds organic matter into the soil. Organic matter adds so many things to benefit the soil system. You know, it increases the microbes. It increases what we call the cation exchange capacity, which is the ability of nutrients to hold onto the soil. It increases the aeration in the soil. The roots can breathe. You know, roots have to have air, just like the top portion of the plant. They have to have the air to survive. You put a plant and just have it in water, it's not going to grow. It's in a flooded soil situation. And it's just not going to grow. It has to have air there, so it benefits the soil that way. More water drainage. The water flows out of the soil. It doesn't sit as much. So there are a lot of different things that adding organic matter back into the soil does. And there's really no cover cropping that's going on to any extent to improve these characteristics, which means we put a crop out there to benefit the soil. We don't usually get a cash for that crop, but it's turned back into that soil system. So everything they put on the soil, they want cash back. They want cash back. They do not want to put something out there to kind of benefit the soil if they're not going to get it. And all the crop residues are generally removed. Even when they grow wheat, they take all the straw off. Straw is very valuable. It's used in different ways, used in insulation. It's used in making these cakes with dung, and they'll dry them and they'll use them for heating in the wintertime. So straw is used in a lot of different ways and very valuable. Soils generally have high alkalinity, usually 7.5 to 8, which causes lots of nutrient problems for uptake. And overall, there's a very limited understanding of fertility management. I could tell you several different stories about talking to people, and you know, one of the ones that come to mind is I was out in the field one day and I saw a lot of blossom end rot. Blossom end rot is related to water and calcium, right? So calcium is very important. Otherwise, we get a tomato or a pepper where it has on the end of the fruit, it tends to be kind of dark and sunken. And I walked into a field one day, and I was trying to get an idea of what type of fertility they kind of put on there. And generally, if we have, we usually limer soils, and lime is calcium carbonate. So I asked them if they kind of put any type of material on there for calcium, and they said, well, no, we just, the winds blow the calcium down onto our fields from these mountains or something, you know, and that's where they would associate getting that into the field. And that's why they're having such a problem, is because there's no calcium in the soil for uptake. And even if you do have adequate calcium, you still have to have water for uptake. And even in the early spring, even if you have water, even if you have adequate calcium, and the soil is cold, you don't get uptake. So early season tomato production, even here, you will get some blossom end rot. And there's nothing really you can kind of do about it. And fertility practices are not even based on nutrient levels in the soil. They just kind of throw stuff out there and let it go. One thing they were trying to do is, when I was there, do a deep placement of urea. You know, they were putting urea out when it was like temperatures we have in the last few days. It's 100 degrees. They're putting urea out. What's going to happen with urea? It's just going to kind of go. They're losing 70% of the nitrogen through volatilization. But through deep placement of urea in the soil, so they're digging a little hole and they're putting these cakes down in the bottom, so when the roots finally grew down, they would get to the urea. But just going out and throwing urea out around your plants, you're going to lose a lot of it when the temperatures are so high. It smells like ammonia, right? You know what ammonia kind of smells like, right? So when you're out in the field and you smell ammonia after someone has put urea out, you can kind of you know what's going on. All that nitrogen is being lost that they paid for. So that's why you want to get it. And even if you have no other way to do it, you put urea out, cover it with some soil, and that will prevent that volatilization from occurring in the high temperatures. So this is the photo I took. Nutrient loss from the soil is constant. You can see where they've taken all the straw basically and put it in these bales, and they will take these to the market and sell them or use them at home. There's lots of nutrient removal, little added back into the system, and crop residues are consistently removed from the field. And what's left here, they'll take their cattle out there and let them kind of graze over what's ever left out there on that field. So nothing is really added back into the system. So cover crop, this is a plant that's grown for protection and soil enrichment, planted between periods of crop production, primarily to prevent soil erosion, to improve soil organic matter, as I just talked about, prevent nutrient leaching, and increase soil fertility in the overall system. And another type of soil improvement method is a living mulch. This is a cover crop that can be interplanted or sown with the primary cash crop and intended to serve the functions of a mulch, primarily weed suppression, and to regulate soil temperature. So you're planting two crops together, and one is kind of preventing weeds or regulating or lowering that soil temperature. But a lot of times the living mulch really don't work because there's a lot of competition going on between the plants, and if there's not a lot of water in the system, the living mulch it'll take a lot of water away from your primary crop as well. A green manure is a cover crop that you grow and you turn it into the soil and it becomes a manure, right? So that's why I call it a green manure, because it's a green material you're kind of turning into organic matter and making that soil much better. And intercropping of one crop with another has been done, and I've seen it a lot, mostly used for another cash crop. Like if you have a young orchard that's not producing yet, but those trees are growing, you can come in and put in something like alfalfa underneath it and come in and cut the alfalfa off and get a little bit of money, like these photos here. So this is a young orchard here, kind of developing. You'll see in between here they have some alfalfa, and they'll cut it and they'll put it in bundles, and each one of these is about 50 AFs or so when they go to the market. So you can see the size of the alfalfa here underneath, and you can see the basin irrigation scheme here, kind of the berms around the edges there. But young trees, they're trying to do something with that. Water management is a major problem. And first time I went to Afghanistan, I could not believe my eyes when we were driving that all this rice was being grown everywhere, and rice is fairly inexpensive to grow, and it takes a lot of water to grow rice. That's what really got me. I just couldn't believe in a dry country like this they're growing a lot of rice. I always associated rice being grown in areas where there's lots of water. Even in the United States, like South Carolina and Georgia, along the tidal areas, rice was grown. But here, inefficient water use, and we'll talk a little bit about this. Too little water. This is our interpreter with a village elder, and he was talking about how his water issue that he had caused a lot of problems with developing these small onion bulbs. He was an onion grower, and you can see these piles here behind him, but because of the water issue, he had to make a decision. He had two fields. He had his onion field, or he had his wheat field. His wheat field was for his family. They have to have the wheat to eat, to survive, and he had his primary cash crop, which was onions. So he didn't have enough water. He had to choose. He had to choose one. So he chose the wheat, of course, and then that left his onion crop very lackluster. Other major issues, pest management. You see down here, this is the melon fly issue. White flies here, powdery mildew, aphids also are important. Pest management, often major limiting factor to vegetable production. Growers just don't have that information that they need. There's no real extension service to kind of tell them what they need to do. They usually go to these supply input dealers and they tell them, oh, well, I have this chemical, but they're just trying to get rid of some of the stuff, you know? And it may not be the right chemical for what they're trying to do. So it's a big mess. So just understand that pest management is an issue. And this is basin irrigation on chili pepper. You can see these are supposed to be rows here. And look at all these missing plants in here. And that's because they're sitting in water for a long period of time. They don't understand the problem with Phytophthora, which is a terrible disease-causing organism. And they love water conditions, and they'll just totally devastate pepper in that type of situation. So the way to kind of combat this is to put them up in a furrow irrigation system. Don't give them as much water. Don't let them sit in water for a long period of time. Weed control is an issue. See, this is tomatoes here grown on a bed. They usually walk down between them, and where the water kind of flows here, you can see all the weeds that are coming up in there. And they usually, a lot of times, they'll put their animals down in there to kind of to feed. Another issue here is sun scald. You have a tomato that's kind of growing and developing. The plant kind of falls over. Those fruit that weren't originally exposed to the sun becomes exposed to the sun, and that is the problem. Here in the United States, we stake all our tomatoes in production, so the plants don't fall over. You know, so once a plant starts growing, and then you get a wind or something, and it falls over, those fruit that have developed under the foliage are now exposed to the sun, and this is called sun scald, and develops a lot in that. And this is me out in a field on chili peppers, and you can see the one here in front of me. This is caused by Phytophthora, and I was trying to show another one over here, but you can't see it. But this one is Phytophthora. About 10 to 20% of that field was infected with Phytophthora because of improper water management. And for a melon success story, I want to kind of share one thing with you. Melon fly is a major issue. And back in 2008, 2009, they've done some trainings with Train the Trainer in certain provinces that had lots of melon production on IPM. And just from a simple little training, they took what the yields were the year before and the year after the training. And the year after the training, they had like increases in more than 300% of what they had the year before because of the issue with training and what to understand about how to control the melon fly, the life cycle, when to spray, what to spray. The timing is very critical, and just kind of spreading the word out in those areas about what is the best way to control this. And that was a very simple little thing to do. Didn't cost a lot of money, and they made a lot of money off of it. Farmer training is something that I just kind of talked about, but also I used to, when the Illinois ADT was in, I think they were in Kunar province, they would always send me a storyboards. And I think these are kind of interesting for you to kind of look at and see what they were actually doing relating to fruit and vegetable production. I got 3 storyboards on here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I'm going to let you just kind of read through it. It talks about the purpose of each one of these trainings. And this is the agribusiness development team from Illinois and what they did. And we had a couple of our students from SIU that were part of this team. And actually, we trained this team at SIU, Southern Illinois University, before they were deployed. So that was a little bit of the precursor to what you're getting here today. We would train, have a whole a couple days of where they would come down and do all the training and get up. Basically what you're getting here, they would come down and get. So just kind of interesting to kind of see what their mission summary was and all that. So I've got 3 storyboards here for you to kind of just kind of look through, and they talk about how they're helping the farmer and all that sort. So it's kind of related to farmer training and success stories and everything. So the little things that you can do, in my opinion, to make life better for somebody is going to have more of a lasting effect than some of these other things that we're doing. So little things make a difference. Large projects, when we're gone, are going to be destroyed. But little things that we can make a change for will work. So what are some of the suggestions for action? What are some of the things that we can do? Now, in the government, you can do a few things, but try to use a combination of a lot of these different delivery channels that you have. You may not work a lot with the mail or Dell. You may be working a lot in the community. So you have to kind of work with whomever that you have there at the time. And I have here, you can communicate changes through the mail and Dell if they're there, provincial officials, other community leaders, kind of work all together to provide useful information on basic agricultural problems that you know and can fix. So read through the storyboard, kind of relate that back to what that is. And all my colleagues, and I kind of agree with them, tell me that the biggest change that you can kind of do is to work within the community framework to kind of give them some of these ideas about long-term sustainable ways that they can make life better for themselves. What are some of the things that little things that we can do that we can make life better for them? You know, if we can communicate something about soil to them that we know, we can make their life better. It sustains them for a longer period of time. And supply chain actors engage input supply dealers and buyers in providing technical guidance to farmers. Now, this is a little bit more difficult because these guys here, input supply dealers, they're wanting to make money. So that was a major issue we had before with these guys selling product that they didn't need. So they're just wanting to make money. They sell them an insecticide that is the wrong insecticide. It's not going to kill the insect that you want, or it's an insecticide that will kill the insect, but you're using too much. So there's a lot of issues. But just kind of engage these guys in some way in the buyer to provide some type of technical guidance, what they need, work out a plan, kind of get an idea what they're going to need to kind of control certain types of insects and diseases throughout the growing season, how much money is this going to cost, what am I going to get for my product here at the end if I have a typical yield, how much am I going to get per piece, all that sort of thing. So, for example, in the winter, you can, this is an example of a suggestion for action, have the Dell organize meetings between produce buyers and the growers. Find out what the buyers really want this year. What do they want? We're used to growing melons, but maybe the melons aren't what we want to kind of rotate that field out. We only have one field. We want to grow something else. What can we kind of grow in that field that they really want, and what's the timing that they want to have that? We can kind of monitor plant growth. We can provide reach back to growers on technical issues that may somewhat come up on any sort of plant that you're growing. You're going through the production season. You just don't plant it and leave it and come back and harvest it. You're always having to go in and look at it and see what changes can be kind of made, what is happening to that crop. Some years you might have a disease come in that you need to control. Other years you might have an insect. Some years you might have both. But you need to kind of follow that as it kind of goes on. That's what I'm talking about, technical issues. And then early summer, the Dell arranges meetings with buyers to make sure that market is still there for the grower. So they'll have the product ready to go at that specific timing that they wanted. And in the fall, They kind of do a review of the season with the growers to kind of see what happened, what do they need to kind of improve on. I know this is the whole year, but maybe somewhere in here you can kind of work into that. But barriers to change. You've talked about MIRABs a little bit, I guess, the water managers. They really lack a basic understanding of vegetable water use. They're not even employed through MEL. They're employed through the Ministry of Power and Water. And it's totally different from MEL. And they're just there. They turn the water on, they turn it off. They turn the water on, they turn it off. So they don't understand that this crop needs more water at this specific growth stage compared to this plant that needs more. The Dell personnel that I've met are just there, and most of the ones I've met are just there. That's all I can say. Right? They're just there. They want to sit somewhere. They don't want to go outside. They don't want to engage growers. They don't want to do a lot of things. And they really have lack a basic understanding of vegetable crop management. We had a field day. And the only reason you can get these guys there is give them money, right? So you give them a little bit of a per diem to get them there, bring them in on buses, and they'd sit around and not really pay attention to what you're doing, and you give them the money, they get back on the bus, and they're gone. So they're really just there. You know, most of the educated people have either been killed or left Afghanistan. So there's a huge void there. And a lot of these people are just there to be there. That's how I look at it. Just there to be there. And they're really not accustomed to providing hands-on training to farmers like we Americans are. Afghans, poor, small-scale growers are risk-averse. You've talked about food insecurity. Their family cannot afford to really have a crop failure. Otherwise, they go hungry. And most won't try for something new for failure in their neighbor's eyes and don't want to try. A lot of these older guys won't, but maybe you get some newer guys that want to kind of try some. But the existing resources available in Afghanistan can be used to improve vegetable production through some of these simple things and just kind of keep a lot. There's a lot more out there, but I just tried to hit some of the things that I thought would be something that you could kind of think about. And we'll talk about some of these things out in the field again. We're going to kind of, you'll see me again this afternoon for our vegetable part out in the field. But I want to talk about something that you can kind of do that's kind of simple. And I want you to kind of understand that for me, small changes are going to provide a lasting change. You know, just don't try to do something big, just something small. If you go over and you help them understand more about soil or water scheduling or whatever, that small change, even though you think it may not make that change, it is going to make that lasting change for them. Okay? And you've talked about the eAfghan website, very good. I've put some stuff on there as well for Reachback, as well as myself and my colleague Dave Hedrick at SLO, who does this presentation over there when we have that meeting there, as well as USDA Afghanistan. So there's a lot of places to find needed information, and I would suggest before you even are deployed, you kind of go in and look through that eAfghan website. There's lots of information there related to ag. And with that, I just want you to kind of understand it is a different culture. And I throw this one up there last to kind of show you how the culture is kind of separated. And it's just that way, where you have all the ladies working in one place and you have all the men working in another, and all the ladies are usually within a compound, the men are usually outside the compound. So it's a different environment than what we're used to, and we have to kind of adapt to that environment for a while, the time that we spend there. So there's other stuff in the back there. They talk about crop rotations, pest management, crop families, and you can kind of look at some more of that information. I have about a minute or so if I take a question. And if you have any questions, you can talk to me this afternoon too.
Yeah, I got a question on that. You go back to that one, where it had two little water. You had the guy that had the wheat field and then the onions. So, okay, he's got an issue. He doesn't have enough water. So how do you fix that? Do you say, okay, take your field of onions, you only maybe take, let's say it's about as big as this room, only a third of onions, and then what other crops can you plant that don't need as much water? Is that the solution to that, or how do you?
Well, the solution would have been to take a little bit of the water off of the wheat to put it over on in that field. He probably, when the Mirob comes in, they just, the water just kind of goes. But he could have taken some of that water over there or grown a crop at another timing that where he would have had the water once the wheat was off the field, like you were saying, is another way to do it. So the wheat and the onions are a crop that are grown in the spring just like wheat. So they're going to need water at the same time. So if he'd have grown another crop a little bit later that didn't have the same water requirements, he could have probably had water for that particular field.
So when you go to these websites, will there be something that can tell you, like carrots, for example, they need so much amount of water per how much space, or how does that work? I mean,
The timing's important.
How do I know how much water a crop needs? Potatoes need less water than onions, and then lettuce needs even less water.
I think that's on. It's on there.
Yeah, there's some general guidance to it. Yeah, unfortunately, agriculture is not so cut and dry. There are so many issues that come up, like we were learning about. I don't sound like a lawyer here, but if it's a sandier soil or a clay soil, the watering will be different. But there'll be some indicators, won't there, if the plant looks like
Yeah, you can kind of tell. It's just I just kind of know what a plant kind of at this particular stage. Early in the growing season, you can get by with a lot less water. It's just remember whenever for that particular crop, when it's starting to produce its product is when it needs the water the most. So we can usually get by on most plants under drought conditions until we get to the point where it's for potato. Potatoes don't need a lot of water until they start setting tubers under the ground. And that's when they need the water because they're setting their product. You just need to keep the plant alive until that point to get it to where it is producing that valuable product. So just keep in your mind that plants can kind of survive, but once they get to when they're producing the particular product, whether it's a fruit, whether it's a cabbage head, whether it's roots underground, that is when it primarily needs most of its water resource. Like you're talking about carrots. When does carrots need it? It needs it when that root is starting to swell underground. That's when it needs most of the water. Just general guidelines.
But this actually, I think you bring up a really good point, Mark, because this would be a good teaching moment. If you had this photo, or if they had this problem of these, tiny golf ball size onions. That's a great icebreaker with the community and the Dale. Say, what happened here, guys? What do you think happened? Get a discussion going. Say, okay, so for this next year, how do we prevent that? How do we get baseball or softball size onions instead of golf ball? So I think have them try to figure out what happened. They are.
And this issue really was an upper watershed issue. Not a lot of water, and users upstream using more water than they should. He's a downstream user, and downstream users usually get screwed.
But that's a good one to, I would say just that, as I said, that could be a very good icebreaker. As you say, he's downstream, but he's also part of the community. So, what are some things he can do on his farm to optimize the water he does get? But again, how do we get some kind of equitable use of the water? Have that community kind of process that, and that might be an excellent way to start to deal with some issues, conflicts in the community. That's just a quick thought on that.
Well, you'll see me more this afternoon. We'll do a little bit of
Alan's got a full session for you this afternoon. And just a reminder, many of the main points that Alan mentioned, again, these are on your smart card. So he talked about the cropping calendar, different plant families, and the crop rotation. So again, we've got the essence of Alan's information here on the smart card, and coupled with the Afghan Ag and Alan.
You should be able to find most everything you need. I put all that together on there. for the smart card.
You've got several sources to reach.
To kind of pull from. Yep.
Well, thanks very much, Alan.
All right. Thank you.